Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? Third day. My name is Faizan. I am a senior director for product management at Box. Um, I have a couple of demos to show. I want to talk about machine learning in the enterprise, but I would love to sort of get a sense of the audience. Are there any developers in the crowd? Awesome. Are there any startups in the crowd? Any CIOs, CTOs for enterprises? How many people from big enterprises? Awesome. That's a good sort of rounded out audience. And I think we'll touch on topics that are of interest to everybody. So I focus on two areas at Box. One is related to integrations, such as our G Suite or Gmail integrations. And the second area is related to machine learning, especially as it applies to the enterprise. So first, actually, I have a question for this audience. Is machine learning ready for the enterprise? People who think yes. People who think no. That's interesting. So only one show of hand who is actually my engineering manager. So I also have a sort of a, I'll take a carrier limiting hypothesis to start, and then we'll work through that. But first, a little bit about Box. How many of you are familiar with Box? Awesome. So for the few who aren't, we provide sort of a secure central place for enterprises to store their content. We provide you sort of a place to collaborate with best-of-breed applications. We have about 1,400 integrations. Customers that come to us are customers who are actually looking for a very secure and compliant environment. So we have e-governance, discovery, and features like that, which are required by industries which are in a very sort of a secure, compliant-driven work environment. And then we also enable AI-driven workflows. We leverage the best-of-breed machine learning and AI, and we bring that into Box so that it can be applied on your enterprise content. We have 85,000 customers, 69% of the Fortune 500, almost every geography in the world. And we work with Google on a number of areas. The first one is sort of the G Suite Box integration, so doc, sheets, and slides, which was shown for the first time publicly during this conference, which means that you can go into Box and say, create a new Google Doc or Google Sheet or Google Slide, and that document would be created in Box. It will be long-term stored and retained in Box. You get all of the power of the Google collaboration suite, all of the real-time collaboration, all of the benefits that you have with Google editors. But if you're a Box customer, you get the security and compliance that you have been using all along. We also showed sort of a Gmail integration where now from within Gmail, you can add attachments to an email. You can download attachments from an email, so it's a much integrated experience. We also launched a Hangouts chat. And lastly, we work on Google ML, which we'll talk about in this session. So how did we get into machine learning? So businesses today see sort of an explosion of data, right? There is 800% growth in enterprise content, and 80% of that is unstructured. So that's a really big deal. So as you look at how it's growing, most of that content is unstructured. There are images, there are audio files, there are video files, there are scanned PDFs. These are documents that are really hard to process by machines. Previously, for machines at least, this was sort of doc data. They couldn't figure out what to do with this. What's driving this? There are new ways of working, tools like what Google provides, new collaborative work styles. There's also a proliferation of iPads, iPhones, new sensors, which means that there's a lot of new photos, audio, everything coming in from Internet of Things. And then obviously there is this migration of data to the cloud. All of these three trends basically drive this sort of explosion of content. So businesses have to invest in sort of very manual processes, create business process around how to process this content, how to tag them. If you're a bank, you're scanning in forms. If you're a ride-sharing company, you're taking in driving licenses. If you're a call center, you have all of these audio calls, and the volume of all of this content is growing, and you're trying to figure out how to handle that. And AI, machine learning, plays a key role in that. So last year at BoxWorks, which is our annual conference, it's coming up again August 28th and 29th, we announced Box Skills, which is our initiative to bring best of breed machine learning to your secure, compliant enterprise content. And this is a framework which basically allows you to connect something like Google Vision, something like Google Video, something even like AutoML to your content in Box. And one of the reasons that we did this is we've often heard this quote, machine learning is the new electricity. If you talk to CIOs and CTOs, to them it's a really weird kind of electricity because it feels like I have to uproot my factory, I have to take out all of my appliances and take it to where the electricity is. It doesn't function in a way where the electricity just naturally comes to wherever your content is. So we were trying to solve that problem where we have one of the sort of largest repositories of valuable content from the enterprise, and we wanted to enable it in a way where, in some cases, an admin can just go in and check two checkboxes and have machine learning apply to his content in the enterprise. He can choose which folder to whitelist, which folder to blacklist, turn it on for the whole enterprise. Or you can have really, really custom machine learning which is targeted to a particular business process. And you can also apply that to content within Box. And this is something that we call custom skills. So as an example, these are sort of three skills that we had, which are images, audio, video. So if you put in an image, you will start to get Google Vision tags, and you will start to see text, locations, faces, objects. If you're in audio, you will get a transcript, you'll get topics. If you have a video, you'll get objects, you'll sort of recognize the speakers, sort of get a, not really face recognition, but basically a timeline of when the speakers appear in that video. And all of these are things which, to the admin of the enterprise, are very simple to turn on. It's just like a configuration. And to the end user, he just actually sees the exact same preview that he was seeing, but now it's enriched with this machine learning metadata. So Google, as we know, is sort of one of the best companies out there in terms of machine learning technologies. And BoxScale helps you bring that machine learning into Box. So the way we approached this was we looked at a bunch of machine learning outputs. And we said, how do we solve the user interactivity problem? Because as we talked to CIOs and CTOs, their biggest challenge was, one, maybe my content is not resident exactly where the machine learning is which I want to use. So how do I get that content there? Then once that content is there, how do I make sure that that same security and compliance which I am currently applying in my enterprise stays there? Then the other question is, how much do I have to build? How much do I have to build in terms of the user experience, in terms of capturing the metadata that is coming in from machine learning, in terms of displaying that metadata, in terms of the user interactivity of all of that? So we basically chose to take care of all of that. So we basically made these cards, which are basically developer components. So if you're working with audio, if you're working with images, if you're working with video, if you're working with contracts, you can basically get data from any machine learning API, transcode it into sort of a certain JSON format, and then you will be able to see this within Box, and you will also get interactivity. So if you click on a topic, it will actually show you the timeline. If you click on a sentence in the transcript, it will jump to that. If you click on a speaker in the video, it will show you where that speaker appeared in the video. So it actually creates the user interactivity component, which otherwise you would have to build yourself. So in terms of sort of launching some content-based AI machine learning into the enterprise, this sort of really, really accelerates your time to value. So it works in a really simple way. You have a file. We basically send that file to an AI service like Google Cloud. We get an output back. We write it in our metadata format. With our metadata, you can actually get our metadata has APIs. It has sort of reporting, and is sort of we're building automation and workflow around that. So you get all of those capabilities. So let me now jump to a quick demo. So this is the simplest example. You have an image in Box, and you can actually see that when this image was uploaded, this image went to Google Cloud Vision, and this metadata was returned, and it is sort of saved here in our cards. This is another example that we made, which is supposed to sort of show what happens in sort of call centers. And in this case, you can see that it has picked up sort of all of the keywords. You can actually play the audio file. You can actually see what was discussed, and then you also get a transcript from it. In the case of a video, previously you just had a basic preview. You could see the preview. You could have a high quality preview. You could play the video. But now what you get is you actually see that there are two sort of speakers who appear in this, Jim Cramer, and then there is Aaron. So if I want to jump to where Aaron first appeared in the video, I just click here, and it will actually take the video to that spot. Similarly, you can see all of the topics that are there in the video.
Well, I think, irrespective of a Trump agenda.
And you can also see a complete transcript of it. And if you were to click sort of on a particular sentence in the transcript, it will jump to that. So all of this was taken care of by box skills, and the results from the machine learning API are actually now in this metadata, and all of the capabilities that you have for metadata in box can now be applied to this metadata. Similarly, we had this scenario recently where the city of San Jose was using this, and they actually do their city meetings, and they wanted that recorded, but they also wanted people to be able to consume that quickly. So you can see that this is a government meeting, so there's sort of wrong decision is one of the topics that was discussed. You can see all of the faces. If you know somebody who is your council member, and you can sort of go in and jump there, you can actually see the transcript of the whole conversation. And now all of this is searchable. So if you just went to the normal box search, and if you started searching, you would start to see results which are coming back because of these keywords or because of these transcripts. So previously, images, video, audio, these were formats where it was sort of harder for you to process. So what we'll do is we'll take some live photos right now, and then we'll show you how that works. Michelle, who is a product manager on my team, who was also a speaker for our Google Suite integration, is going to help out with that. Here's another example of something that you can build. So what I'm basically showing is how the same sort of card set is helping with a different set of components, right? So this is, for example, a call with this is an emulation of a call center call. You're actually seeing the transcript. You're actually seeing parameters like was the agent over talking? Was an appointment made? What's the probability that an appointment would be made? In this case, it's very low, so no, an appointment wasn't made. Was there PCI or SSN information discussed? Did the agent do a right greeting? Did an agent do confirm the address? And if you look at the PCI SSN content, if you go into the transcript, you can actually see that that has been redacted from it. So the skill was actually looking at the transcript. It identified where there was PCI content, and then it redacted that, right? So what we did just right now is we're basically just taking live photos of this, and we'll see how that works out. So this is actually this room, just like before all of you walked in, and this was uploaded, and Google Cloud Vision came back with these 2 tags. And just right now, I think we have gotten 2 more images, and let's see how that goes. So this, I think, is actually, yeah, this is just me preparing in the speaker room, and I took this photo, and these are the tags that were returned automatically. But what you will notice is that this is crazy that it was able to pick all of this from the image. So this link is actually the link in the browser that you almost can't see. And it's actually picking up all of the information. I had Slack open. The slide actually says it's machine learning for the enterprise. This is an image that was taken just now, and it come back. It's audience, convention, crowd, auditorium. These are the tags that you're getting back from Google Vision. So this happens in seconds. So as soon as an image is uploaded, an event is fired off. Google processes that image, returns back the data in seconds. Audio and video obviously take longer. And we also work with our partners on sort of the security and sort of compliance layer of it so that it's easy for enterprises to buy this. So our approach here was that if you look at, so this was a presentation by Social Capital, which I have a great respect for in terms of sort of the data analysis of the tech industry. They're one of the top VCs in the Valley. And they actually described this as machine learning and AI is progressing, you're actually seeing billions of dollars invested at each of these layers. So compute, chip. We heard a ton of announcements from Google. NVIDIA is in that space. Google is in the infrastructure space. Amazon is also there. Algorithms. Google is creating its own algorithms. They have a ton of sort of machine learning experts, and they're sort of leading the charge in terms of getting those algorithms. And then they're also using those in some of their applications, as we saw in the last 3 days. So we look at ourselves as the application layer. So on the application layer, what we are basically doing is we're trying to figure out how to get our end users and our customers, the enterprise, the benefit of the whole of the stack in a really easy way. Right? So in the examples that I showed you, to the end user, to the customer, it's something that happens super easily for them, and they get to benefit from this massive investment that has happened over the last decade in this space. So now back to the question, is the enterprise ready for machine learning? So I'll float a carrier limiting hypothesis for a second, which is that it's not. And I'll describe sort of some of the reasons or some of the things that I've seen, which I would like us, so we as developers, as engineers, as sort of responsible people in the enterprise, do see some of these trends. And let's sort of go through each of them. So today, as you look at this, this is the famous hype curve, which is as soon as any technology triggers, any new technology appears, you see a hype curve. In the peak, there is a ton of sort of expectation from that. But in almost every case, in almost all technology waves, what has happened is that after that, there is this trough of disillusionment, and then it starts to pick up. And there is this sort of slope of enlightenment in terms of what we should build. So if you look at it in the web, right, early days of the web, lots of excitement, pets.com, and then eventually disillusionment, and then we start to see a bunch of people using these technologies in a much better way, and then it sort of slowly grows back up. So where is machine learning today? Is it at its peak of expectation? Is it at the trough of disillusionment? Are any of us disillusioned, have been disillusioned? It's going, so you think it's here? The first one, okay. Going to the peak. So depending on your experience, depending on what happened in your startup, depending on what happened in your enterprise, you might have sort of different conclusions for it. I definitely see a peak. But then I also, when I talk to enterprises, there are enterprises who have run really, really lengthy projects and then have not been super happy with those results. But then they have learned. And then if you look at the stuff they're doing this year or the stuff that they started last year, you can actually see them picking up projects which are appropriate to the ML available today. And as sort of the education alignment around what machine learning can do that spreads, you can actually see this trend. I have been sort of super happy at conferences while meeting customers. So once we launched box scales, I think we got about, I don't know, 600 inbound use cases. And I think we have looked at maybe hundreds of machine learning providers, big, small, trying to look at those use cases and trying to match sort of machine learning capabilities. And I also see a trend that you can see organizations where now they're taking up projects, or maybe by day one, their approach was something very, very realistic. And then you also see the reverse of that. And like I meet a ton of companies that are AI companies, which sounds a lot like in 99, 2000, everybody was an internet company and then everybody was a mobile company. And AI is kind of like that. I believe eventually AI is just like learning JavaScript. Eventually everybody has that capability, although starting out, there is this period where it's sort of hyped extraordinarily. And there are both sort of user experience issues and sort of artificial intelligence issues in this, but you actually see the amount of sort of capabilities that are coming out. There is a diverse set of capabilities coming out, and they're sort of super rich, and there's a lot more capability. If you look at it every year, you see a noticeable upward curve in terms of the capabilities of sort of these machine learning technologies, right? So in terms of the patterns that we have seen, so in the enterprise, I think the first key question is start with the right problem. And what I've seen is a lot of people trying to go for the most complex thing. So based on that, I think one of my sort of key points or takeaways is please don't start with curing cancer. If this is as you start looking at machine learning technologies. Curing cancer is an example, but if you look at that, that's the extreme edge. That's the edge where you're saying we're going to get better than experts. And you're taking one of the most complex problems, and if you're an enterprise starting to do something, you probably don't want to start there. You probably want to crawl, walk, run, and you probably want to pick problems which actually the time to value is shorter, and it's a business process where you can actually get the value of that really, really quickly. So today, as I look at machine learning, I think, yeah, I almost look at it as it has the capability of a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old. So you could teach a 13-year-old how to get data out of a driving license. Previously, you couldn't teach a computer like, I don't know, 15 years ago. You could teach somebody how to look at a resume and figure out where the person had studied. You could teach somebody to just look at a form and figure out what the form number was from scans. And now imagine that you actually had, you could scale these to millions of 13-year-olds. That actually brings you a certain amount of power that wasn't there before in the way that we were running business processes. One of my sort of favorite examples is that if you're sort of a ride-sharing company, so sometimes when you go into a city, you actually have a really clear target. You have an assigned target of the number of drivers that you need on the road, something like, let's say, 50,000 drivers. You have an app where people are submitting their driving licenses. And as you get your driving licenses, now you have a challenge because Some drivers just want to get driving quickly and they actually upload junk images. They don't even take a photo of it. They'll just turn around, take a photo in the car, have a pet photo, have a kid photo, and upload it thinking that the process will probably go through. There are a bunch of people with expired licenses. There are a bunch of people with valid licenses. So what happens is that there's a manual process where you take away the sort of junk images. You figure out driving licenses which are expired and you also sideline them. Then what's left, you actually have to do sort of manual data entry. And the manual data entry is something like 7 minutes to enter a driving license and then 2 minutes to verify that. But now if you look at this business process, this is an awesome business process for machine learning. We actually used Google Vision to sort of build a quick demo of it. There are companies who actually just specialize in this. Why? Because there is something happening at scale, at a massive cost, at a massive time sink. And not only that, there is a second process, which is the verification of that is already in place, right? So humans sometimes can have, humans also have some degree of error rate. So when humans go and sort of tag all of this data, they end up with errors. If we remember sort of captions from 15 years ago, all of those were done by humans, but there were a ton of errors when you were watching a movie or Seinfeld. And if you look at those captions, there are errors there. So humans also have a sort of an error rate. And anytime that you have a business process that's in these two layers, where there is some manual identification of data, some manual tagging of data, and then there is an exception queue or there is a QA process. These processes lend themselves really, really well to application of machine learning in scenarios where previously you wouldn't have thought of doing this some years ago, but now it's getting sort of relatively easy, and you can find companies who are sort of built on technologies like Google, using Google Vision, but then who are actually solving this particular business problem. So the way I look at that is that if you're starting out, the first few projects to do, don't look at them as autopilot. Like, don't try and make the self-driving car as your first project. Google can. Google is doing an awesome job at that, has leadership in that. But if you're an enterprise, if you're a startup, if you are an enterprise whose core business is sort of something else, and if you try and make sort of expert systems, which are replacements of experts, I'm not seeing sort of a ton of success there. I am seeing a ton of success if you start thinking about it as a co-pilot. If you start thinking about machine learning not as the autopilot mode, but as the co-pilot mode, where the co-pilot sometimes say, hey, the speed is too slow, you might stall. The altitude is too low, you might want to increase altitude. Any of these scenarios where you're augmenting human capability, but there is still some human element involved. But more specifically, it's not replacing the guy who's trying to cure cancer. It's actually replacing something which was something more mechanical, but at scale. Which is not to say that there isn't a ton of success in data science projects, in really, really complex projects. But what I would say is that as I have seen enterprises start to do this, it seems that if they try this, they have more success to show. And I think because there is a lot of hype in the market, us as engineers and developers also sort of have a very strong voice because it's something new. So people look to us to figure out whether this is doable or not. And I'm seeing a ton of projects where basically it's being implemented in this manner, and you're seeing a ton of value. In fact, I remember this conversation with CIO where it was like, we have these many sales calls, and I want machine learning to tell me if this deal will close. And like my first response is, even if the CEO or CIO was listening on the call, can you tell whether this deal will close? Because it's pretty hard. It's sort of a mixture of art and science. But maybe if you could just figure out which products were discussed, was there a price quoted? Well, a ton of other stuff which we saw in examples around sort of the call center, contact center stuff that Google was demoing. All of that information becomes really, really rich information if you can extract that information, if you can run reports out of that, if you can run triggers out of that. Sometimes you see that a new pricing package immediately is causing sales to slow down. Sometimes you see a new product shipment has immediately caused more support requests, which is something that was sort of harder to pinpoint before. And in this case, basically, you're not saying that, hey, I'm going to start this project where I will just replace all of these humans really quickly. I look at most of these projects as getting the capability to sort of augment the capability of humans. And so you're enhancing, you're getting more efficiency. And most of these projects, I feel like you see a lot more sort of tangible results in. So some of the things that we have seen specifically in the enterprise, one of the things is somebody should explicitly opt in. So as an example, we obviously chose not to say that your images or audios or videos or resumes or something else is being processed right now. It's basically somebody has to explicitly opt in, which is not necessarily the case in consumer. But I think in enterprise, it's sort of something that is super necessary. Don't overhype. We talked about it a ton. In terms of frameworks being open and flexible, so our strategy is in general to be an open framework, a Switzerland, a best of breed environment. So we look at all of our sort of technology investments as something which enables not one, but many of these technologies. And the reason is that for multiple reasons, you'll find people, sometimes somebody is doing some work in machine learning that the other person isn't. Sometimes somebody has a commercial relationship with somebody and they want to work with that company. So even within one enterprise, you'll actually find people using like 10 different vendors for machine learning pieces. So we actually, that was one of the core things that we looked at and we said, hey, our strategy is going to assume that this is going to happen, and we're going to support this in our sort of technical infrastructure. The other thing which happens often and causes sort of pain is if from start to end through the whole process, you haven't made it super clear what was human generated and what is machine generated. So if you start to add metadata automatically to process, but it isn't clear, so like when I go to YouTube and I turn on captions and it says machine generated, I think it's just a small UI thing, but it has massive impact in terms of automatically how users understand or sort of perceive that differently. Versus if it isn't clear to me that this metadata was added by a machine or a human, or this workflow was spawned by a machine or a human, then there are chances that downstream that process will create sort of massive confusion. Data isolation in general, like in Box, I think the principle is that your enterprise data is your data. When we work with cloud ML providers, they don't get to keep the file, they don't get to keep the metadata, they don't get to train on your enterprise data. So if your enterprise uses some training and now has its own endpoint for their own specific stuff, that is never going to be used for something else. These are sort of the principles that we work with our partners. And then obviously security, which is sort of related to the last three things, that as you start and use these cloud ML providers, in some cases, we are actually going to the extent of saying that you can just sign a deal with Box. So you just sign Box paper, whatever security compliance we agreed to, and then we work with the partner in the back end with the spreadsheet of 300 rows, where eventually what we're saying to the customer is that yes, we are taking on some of the SLC requirements while there is another machine learning partner involved. So I would like to sort of leave some room for sort of questions and answers. And one way I look at it is there is a question of, is machine learning ready for the enterprise? And there is a reverse question too, which is the enterprise ready for machine learning? And that's a question that only we who work in these enterprises can sort of answer best. I have seen some hints, and those are basically, if somebody comes in and says, hey, I need a machine learning solution for X, and I want machine learning to help me with these research papers, with these patents, with these blah. So now that we have sort of made this thing in a very sort of a visual way, one of my favorite questions to ask is, give me an example of the metadata that you want. And it's amazing that a lot of times you'll find people just struggling to figure out, yes, what the machine learning, what will it do? Like sometimes it's super easy. It will extract their driving license. It will extract expiration date. Sometimes you can see people struggling to figure out, once I apply this machine learning, what is the output that I want? The other thing that I've noticed is that anytime that there is a business process at scale, people already know the cost of it. Because people were tracking the cost of it, they were also tracking the data. So as an example, a ride-sharing company knows how many driving licenses it needs to scan to get into a new city. They aren't going to figure this out just for you. They already had that figured out. A bank kind of knows how many forms or how many new customer onboarding it does per day. A contact center, a call center, usually the massive operations, they actually have data down to, we have these many minutes per month, we have 500,000 calls per day, it's about 800,000 on a weekend, and like detail to that extent. Whenever they actually have detail to that extent, that actually tells me that they understand that business process well enough so that if they were to introduce machine learning efficiencies in that, they would be able to track that, and they would also be able to identify what are the key results that this machine learning is driving. These kinds of scenarios, like to me, it seems like these are these are the ones where you see the quickest response time, you see the quickest sort of coming together of partners, you see the quickest first proof of concept, and you probably see the first quickest sort of deployment. So I think we're almost out of time. Thank you, everyone.